The gameplay for Resident Evil 9 looks incredible. It's giving me the vibes of Resident Evil 7, which I absolutely love because Resident Evil 7 to me is personally, I think, my favorite. And even though I have played Resident Evil 1, 2, 3, 4, I haven't played 5 and 6, but when I played 7, like 7 is the horrifying experience because after 1 and 2, it started to get more and more into the action-oriented atmosphere, which is what I've heard is what 5 and 6 really became, and that's why, you know, those kind of flopped. But then Resident Evil 7 came out, it just went hard in the other direction and just became the scariest game. And it's still one of the scariest games I've ever played in my life. But it's so good because it knows what it is and because of that fact. But Resident Evil works in terms of trilogies in like atmosphere wise, such as 1 through 3 were very survival horror and very, you know, you gotta keep track of everything you got. And then 4 through 6 were like incredibly action oriented. Well, 4 was still a little like scary, but from what I hear, 5 and 6 were just straight action. Like that's it. And then 7 through 9 are very like first person, very scary, back to the survival horror, which I love. And seeing the gameplay for Resident Evil 9, they're starting to listen to people. The people are saying that third person is incredible. Third person, you know, the third person is Resident Evil all the way through and through, and that first person should have never existed. And a lot of people say they're going to play Resident Evil 9 in third person because they're offering third person. They're offering both. They're offering first person and third person because the director of Resident Evil 7 is directing Resident Evil 9. They brought him back, which is incredible because I love Resident Evil 7. I also love how much extra content they made for Resident Evil 7. So hopefully we'll get a bunch of that DLC for Resident Evil 9. We'll see. But I personally love, I mean, when playing a scary game like Resident Evil, I love the spooky bits and I love first person for that. And I feel like that's what Resident Evil 9 is coming back to. I think because Resident Evil 8 was sort of scary, but it was a lot more action oriented because a lot of people said that Resident Evil 7 was too scary, so they purposefully made Resident Evil 8 less scary. But Resident Evil 9, it seems like they're going back to the spooky a little bit more, which I love. And first person, I feel like is that. I feel like first person makes things a lot more intimate, a lot more immersive, and it makes you the one experiencing the spooks, right? And third person, you're like a little distant from the character, so you have a little bit of distance from the situation, making everything around you a little less scary. I mean, it's still scary, but it's not as scary as you being the person there. You know what I mean? But third person makes you a little more attached to the character because you're seeing the character like you would be in like a movie. I think each POV has its own pros and cons, but I think first person is probably the way to go. I mean, that's my opinion. You probably could be third person all the way through, right? But for a really spooky game, I feel like which I feel Resident Evil 9 is trying to be, again, I feel like first person is the way to go. Or at least that's definitely what I'm going to be playing it as.
But third person is the core of the franchise. If you blame first person, then you're not a fan of Resident Evil.
Well, you got to give the first person its due. Resident Evil was going down in the tank. Like, nobody cared about Resident Evil after 5 and 6. So, and then when Resident Evil 7 came out, it completely revitalized the series and gave it a new identity with first-person horror, and it was spooky and it was fantastic. Everybody loved it. I loved it. So I feel like keeping with the identity that brought it back, I think really helps keep the audience that loves the new games and the old games by including third person. So I feel like both are correct, but I personally will be playing in first person to get the spooky atmosphere and the real horror experience, which I'm very much looking forward to. But also we could be talking about Leon too, because a lot of those, early games had Leon. Well, 2 and 4 had Leon. It's hilarious to me that Leon, they said that they were gonna make Leon the protagonist of this game, but to keep it with the spooky vibes and make it really scary, you can't have Leon as the protagonist because he's already been through so much, nothing will scare him. Like it would be against the lore of the franchise for him to jump at like a chair moving, or like the wind blowing through a window going, like none of that would phase him, and he would just go on and destroy the huge monsters bare fist, which is completely understandable because he's very much the face of sort of the actiony parts of the franchise, sort of like Chris Redfield a little bit. So I think it's a great idea that they're making Grace this new protagonist. But in a lot of these Resident Evil games, you do play as multiple different characters. Well, not multiple different characters. There's usually one point in the game where you're playing as another person. And I think Leon will be back for sure. Because we are back in Raccoon City, and I think it's time we saw him again. I think it's time. But that's my views on the first person, third person, whole situation. I think first person for this game is the way to go, based on what we've seen and how it's much more horror oriented. But if you're a Resident Evil, you know, diehard fan that's just from the original games, then third person is definitely for you. But I feel like the director of the game is really trying to go back to the spooky roots, and I think first person is probably the best way to experience that. So I'm definitely gonna do that. But what are you guys gonna do? Let me know down in the comments. And if you like this video, subscribe, like, comment down below, and I would love to make more of these videos. And I will see you all in the next video. Bye-bye!